welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Pamela Jouven. I'm the director of the SME Climate Hub, and I'm really excited to see so many of you business leaders joining us today from all corners of the world. If you're not familiar with the SME Climate Hub, our mission has always been to empower SMEs, so your businesses essentially, to really take meaningful action and build long-term resilience. So we know that carbon credits is a topic that our community has appetite for. In our 2025 community survey, about 60% of our respondents told us that they are either already using or really highly interested in using carbon credits as part of their climate strategy. And the survey also revealed a critical hurdle. So nearly half of those businesses said that they simply don't know how to navigate this space credibly, because unlike massive corporations, of course, SMEs rarely have dedicated in-house sustainability teams to really help them untangle these complex environmental topics. So SMEs need trustworthy information and really clear guidance, which is exactly why we are here today. Before I set the scene for today's conversation, we wanted to get a better understanding of this group's knowledge, level of experience as well with the voluntary carbon market. So you should see a poll pop up now on your screen, and it would be fantastic if you could check the box that best describes your level of understanding around carbon credits. So we're going to give this a couple of minutes. Great, so we have 2 questions there. Would also love to see how large your business is if you're an SME. Last few seconds to vote, and then we'll see what the results are. Okay, so the results should pop up, hopefully. There you go. You should all be able to see this. So 80% of the people on this call are very familiar with the voluntary carbon market, which is fantastic. Another 18% familiar and are already using carbon credits. So we have quite a knowledgeable crowd today, which is going to make this discussion really interesting. 35% of the attendees today are familiar with the voluntary carbon market, but are not using carbon credits yet. They have explored options, and then about a third, so 29%, are unfamiliar, are not using carbon credits, and do not know where to start. Very interesting. So a diverse audience. And then in terms of size of business, a lot of micro businesses, which is quite reflective of the community that we serve at the SME Climate Hub. So 29% have fewer than 10 employees. Half of you guys are small businesses, so fewer than 50 employees. And then we have some medium-sized businesses. Wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing these insights. I think they're definitely going to help us guide the discussion today. So coming back, obviously, to today's webinar and the topic that we'd like to address. So the idea is really to demystify the voluntary carbon market and also explore how carbon credits can serve as a viable and valuable option for SMEs. There are, as some of you know already, I'm sure, there are a number of misconceptions and also, unfortunately, less trustworthy actors in this space, which is why at the SME Climate Hub and with the We Mean Business Coalition, we really believe that purchasing carbon credits should only ever be used with, first of all, quality assurances, and also as a complement to your primary goal, which is, of course, to reduce your own operational footprint and ideally have your emissions within the next 10 years. So when they are combined with these real internal reductions, high quality carbon credits really allow businesses to go further, I'm sure you'll know how protecting and restoring nature is absolutely essential. And by purchasing high quality credits that really support nature-based solutions or carbon removal, your business can actually contribute to critical goals right now. So our purpose today is to help you identify what a high quality credit actually looks like if you don't know this yet. If you do, we'd love to hear your thoughts towards the end. And also obviously looking at this complex and rapidly growing landscape, which can be confusing for some of us, and really look also at credits that are aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. To help us do that, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers who will share free tools, resources, but also, most importantly, real-world stories. So first, we're going to hear from Luke Pritchard from the Women Business Coalition for a general overview, really, and also, to hear about guidelines on how to select useful and credible credits. Then we'll also dive into practical SME case studies with Ryan Jensen from Teleon Consulting and Annie Nyborg from Peak Design. Thank you so much for joining us today. And finally, we will hear from Michelle Jolie from Amazon, who will share insights from an actual carbon credit service provider. As I mentioned before, we will wrap up with a 10-minute Q&A, so there's definitely going to be time for you all to jump in with your questions. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A function throughout the session, really, and we'll come back to them towards the end. And of course, thanks again for your time, your leadership, and also your commitment to a low-carbon future. With this, I'm really pleased to hand it over to Luke to get us started.
Super. Thank you, Pamela. And hi, everyone. Luke Pritchard, Director of the Beyond Alliance, which, much like the SME Climate Hub, is housed here at the We Business Coalition. For those of you who aren't familiar with Beyond, we are a coalition of companies working to bring scale, impact, and integrity to market-based climate solutions. So I was thrilled when Pamela said there was a group of SMEs that were curious to learn more about the carbon market. So I'm going to just take some time to talk through kind of the role of carbon credits in your climate strategy as an SME, what credits can and can't do. Talk a little bit about the state of the market, in particular around quality and integrity, and some of the exciting tools out there that make it much easier for you as an SME to be confident that you are investing in high quality credits. And then we'll just talk a little bit about portfolio approaches, and we're going to do all of this in 10 minutes or less, so it's a lot to get through. So let's get to it. So we can go to the next slide. So I think first, just to set the scene, and Pamela's already touched on this, carbon credits don't replace what you need to do in terms of taking responsibility for your own emissions. So cutting your own emissions, whether it's energy or fleet or operations, that really comes first. Credible climate action starts within your value chain, but climate leadership really involves taking ownership over those ongoing emissions and investing beyond your value chain as well. And that's where the carbon market really comes in. It addresses what you can't abate currently within your value chain. We could go to the next slide. I think it's really important to say up front that carbon has a time value. So warming is cumulative, but we're also reaching critical tipping points that will have these kind of negative reinforcing loops. So it's really important that we do as much as we can today to reduce emissions. An emission reduced today is much more valuable than an emission reduced in 2040 or 2050. And that's precisely what the carbon market does. It allows us to take responsibility for those ongoing emissions. It allows us to act today, and it allows us to avoid some of these tipping points that are really sitting on our doorstep right now. Go to the next slide. And I think it also allows us, particularly as SMEs, to take responsibility beyond our reach. So we know for most SMEs, as for most companies, most of your emissions are in that scope 3 in your value chain, whether it's your customers or your suppliers. And we know as SMEs, unfortunately, you don't always have a lot of control, a lot of leverage, or a lot of influence over those emissions. And so the voluntary carbon market lets you take responsibility for those emissions. Just because you don't have significant influence, that is not an excuse not to act. The carbon market allows you to act today while you grow that influence, while you make smarter choices in terms of your procurement for scope 3. And again, really capitalizes on this fact that there is a time value to carbon. We need to do everything we can today to reduce and remove emissions from the atmosphere. So we can go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about where the voluntary carbon market is today. We actually had in-person buyers boot camp a couple weeks ago with the Beyond Alliance, where we had a couple dozen companies come together. And one of the big messages from companies who have been in this market a very long time is that there's never been a better time to enter the carbon market. I think if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation, it should be this. We've seen more progress over the last 5 years when it comes to governance, when it comes to oversight, when it comes to carbon credit quality than we saw in the 20 years prior to that. And I think what that means for you as an SME is it's much easier now to go out and find really high integrity credits and be real confident that you're investing in something that's really delivering for the climate and in many cases for people and for nature. So if we go to the next slide, I think if somebody asked you to put together a high integrity portfolio 5 years ago, even if you were a really high capacity, large company, it would have been incredibly difficult. We had fragmented standards. We hadn't coalesced globally around what quality looks like, what the criteria is to determine quality. And companies were really just starting to assemble these teams to start to diligence projects and understand the market better. But now there's a lot of tools out there. We've made a lot of progress. We've coalesced around what quality and integrity looks like. We have independent ratings agencies. We have marketplaces. And I'll talk a little bit more about those tools, and you'll hear from some other SMEs on this call on how they're using those tools in their own efforts to procure credits. So we can go to the next slide. So I just want to talk briefly about how quality is defined. And don't worry, don't let your eyes gloss over here and don't get scared because you don't have to do all this. Again, there's an ecosystem out there that can help you do this, but I think it's helpful to start to understand some of these concepts. So I think there's really 5 criteria that are kind of foundational in terms of what a high integrity credit or a high quality credit looks like. So they have to be additional. They have to be permanent. They have to durably keep carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They have to be verified independently by a third party. They can't be double counted, so they have to be retired only by one company or individual. And then there could be no leakage. So it has to be a genuine reduction or removal. You can't just be pushing emissions elsewhere. That's kind of the floor for what quality looks like, but you should really push higher. You should look at credits that are delivering on the sustainable development goals that have co-benefits like biodiversity and livelihoods benefits. You want credits that are using really conservative baselines, that have strong governance in place, that have good benefit sharing arrangements. And this is where it can all start to feel really complicated as an SME. But now I'm going to talk about some of the tools that are out there that can do this work for you and really make your job a lot easier when it comes to putting together a good portfolio. So if there's a second takeaway from this presentation, I hope it's that you recognize you don't have to judge it alone. This is not your job. There are others out there who have dedicated their careers and their lives to doing this, and you should really capitalize on these tools that are out there. So the first is the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, or the ICVCM. This is a global initiative that was set up about 5 or 6 years ago and really has gained a lot of momentum. We're starting to see the ICVCM be adopted into regulations, being endorsed by governments. And what they've done is they've set up a process for evaluating the methodologies that carbon credits use based on that criteria we discussed on the previous slide. And they approve at the methodological level with what's called the CCP label. And if you look at the market today, about 90% of available credits have already been excluded from receiving the CCP label. So this is a really easy way to do a first pass over and kind of screening what types of credits you would consider as looking for CCP labeled credits. The second kind of evolution that we've seen in the last few years, the evolutions of ratings agencies. So ratings agencies go one step deeper. They start looking at individual projects. They operate much like Moody's or Fitch do for bond ratings. They dive into hundreds and thousands of projects, into these details, finding out if they deliver on sustainable development goals, if they deliver on co-benefits, how conservative is their baseline, what mechanisms do they have in place to prevent reversals, and then they give you a rating, a AAA, a B, a C minus. As an SME, it's probably not going to be worth your investment to be a subscriber to these ratings agencies. But I think one of the great things is many of them provide free headline ratings. So you can sign up for an account. You won't get the full report, but you can get the headline rating of a credit, which is another way that you can pretty quickly try to figure out if there's quality and integrity in the credits that you're considering. So Calyx, B0, Solvera, those are the three largest carbon credit rating agencies out there. And many of them partner now with these marketplaces and intermediaries that we see out there. Marketplaces have staff on hand that do additional diligence, and they screen down to a smaller portfolio of projects, which then they offer to you. CNOT, Patch, Cool Effect, Amazon. These are just some of the marketplaces that our companies have worked with, that they've had really good results with, that they really like. There's a lot of other good marketplaces out there as well. As I said, many of these marketplaces will also provide the ratings from the ratings agencies to you. And I think importantly, several of these marketplaces are really designed for smaller buyers. So they allow you to buy in smaller volumes, and they're very transparent in terms of what the pricing is, and they will work with you to help understand the projects and why they passed the diligence and screening that the marketplaces did internally to select the portfolio that is available. So personally, I was really a skeptic of marketplaces 2 or 3 years ago, but I think they play an incredibly important role, particularly for small and medium enterprises, to make your job much easier and to help you feel confident in what you're purchasing. Go to the next slide. So big takeaway here, partner with someone you trust. I think we'll hear from Annie and Ryan in terms of how they determined who they trusted and what that process looked like. But you shouldn't do this alone. Don't feel like this is an overwhelming task. There's these tools and there's these organizations out there that can help make this fairly easy for you. Go to the next slide. So I think another thing just to consider is don't just invest in a single project, put a portfolio together. Again, with marketplaces, you can buy in much smaller volumes. So it's much easier today than ever before to put a portfolio together. I think these three project segments are something everyone should consider. So first, we have nature-based projects. There's both removals, so forest restoration projects, reforestation projects, and avoidance credits, so reducing tropical deforestation. These credits, I think, are incredibly important. It's one of the fastest levers we have to tackle climate change, and they also deliver a lot on co-benefits and on sustainable development goals. The second is what we've bucketed here is novel carbon removal or engineered carbon removal. These are technologies that we have to develop and scale to get to net zero. They tend to be more expensive. So as an SME, it would probably be a much smaller part of your portfolio, but they really deliver this long-lasting, durable carbon storage. So this is things like direct air capture. So pulling carbon dioxide directly out of the atmosphere, storing it down in geological formations. I think it's good to start with a small percentage here, and you can think over time of investing more in this segment of the carbon market. And then the final one is super pollutants. It is really the fastest lever that we have to tackle climate change, our best opportunity to bend the curve on temperature rise. And generally, these credits have been incredibly highly rated by the ratings agencies. They come at a good price point, and they're available for spot purchase on the market today. So if you go to those marketplaces, you'll find these credits available. They also contribute to reducing air pollution and improving health. These are projects like landfill gas, where you capture gas from landfills, or destruction of refrigerants. Again, really fast-acting projects that have the highest impact today. So look across all three of these project types when developing a portfolio. A balance spreads risk and it maximizes the impact of your program. Go to the next slide. Finally, I just want to be clear that, as I said earlier, investing in the carbon market is a sign of leadership. SBTI has now said that companies should be investing in the carbon market, even if you're not going through SBTI for setting targets, which isn't always the right route for SMEs. I think this is important validation. SBTI is very clear now that to be a climate leader, you need to be investing in the carbon market. And I think another just important point there is that they endorse the use of both avoidance and removal credits. So again, that portfolio approach is very important. So final takeaway here is start now. You're not starting alone. Make sure that you're taking responsibility and addressing your value chain and operational emissions. But everyone has ongoing emissions that you can't eliminate today. And that is the perfect role and the purpose for having the carbon market. And then finally, don't go it alone. You'll hear from Annie. You'll hear from Ryan about how they found partners. And we'll also hear from Michelle and the team at Amazon what they have available to make your journey much easier. So with that, I wanted to pass it on to Annie Nyborg from Peak Design, the head of environmental and social impact, to talk about what her journey has looked like and how Peak Design entered the carbon market. So Annie, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Luke. That was the best quick and dirty on carbon credits and markets that I've ever heard. So bravo, really well done. Um, so just a reminder, I'm Annie Nyborg. I work for a company called Peak Design. We are a medium-sized product design company, and we manufacture both soft goods and hard goods. And our supply chain is primarily in Asia, a whole swath of countries in Asia. So I'm going to give you a little context of, our carbon credit journey because we've been in this for a while now. We first measured our carbon footprint back in 2018 for our 2017 emissions. And, we didn't know what we were doing. So we hired a very excellent but very expensive consultant to come in and help us do that. And it was going to be in two phases of work, basically. So we completed the first phase of work, and they came back to us and said, all right, here's your footprint plus or minus 20%. We said, great. And then they said, for the second phase of work, we're going to get you to about plus or minus 10% of what your footprint is. And around that time, we were starting to look into carbon credits, and we realized that we could purchase for the amount it would cost to do the second phase of work and get to plus or minus 10%. We realized we could just round up 20%, make sure our bases were completely covered, and buy high quality carbon credits for all of it for less than what it would cost to do the second phase of work and get a better number on our, carbon footprint. So we said, let's just do that. Let's forget the second phase of work. Let's round up 20% and let's just get carbon credits for all of our emissions. So we ended up doing that, and we ended up actually then retroactively calculating all of our emissions since the inception of the company and offsetting all of it because, again, it was really economical to do at the time in particular. This was back in 2018, and we worked with Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and we wanted the highest quality, lowest cost carbon credit that we could get, and it was landfill gas. Landfill gas is an excellent credit, but it's kind of unsexy. Nobody really, you don't get pretty pictures to put in your impact report, but it's highly effective. And so we ended up buying a lot of landfill gas to basically cover the emissions for the entire existence of the company. And we didn't do it. We ended up, we might have noted it in our impact report if we even had an impact report back then. But it wasn't something we really tooted our horn about. We really saw this as just a table stakes, practice for operating a business. We had just started our carbon journey in terms of decarbonization and thinking about climate strategy. But we just thought this was a pretty good table stakes practice to do. And we thought everyone should be doing this. Every company should be doing this. And so that actually catalyzed the development of the Change Climate Project. We co-founded an organization called the Change Climate Project, which launched in 2019. It operates completely independently of Peak Design now. It's a nonprofit that oversees the climate label certification, which some of you might have heard about. It's an excellent certification and framework that supports businesses in basically measuring their footprints using high quality GHG protocol tool. And then initially the way the climate label worked was that it was a ton for ton addressing of your carbon footprint. So if you had 10,000 metric tons as your footprint, you would buy 10,000 credits to cover that. In the years since it began, the model has become more sophisticated, and instead of a ton for ton model now, it is a internal carbon fee. So basically, you measure your footprint, and there's a price on carbon. Last year, it was $15 is what the Change Climate Project designated for a ton of carbon, and then that gives you a carbon transition budget. And you need to use that budget both in direct value chain reduction projects as well as, you can use on credits as well. So now we're operating, that's how we decide every year how much money we are going to be using on our credits is we utilize the change or the climate label certification process and that the carbon transition budget that we get out of that measurement to determine what we're going to be spending on our carbon credits every year. And as I noted before, when it was a ton for ton model, we were really going for the economics of it, where we were trying to get high quality for low cost. Now that we have a transition budget and we just need to spend a certain amount of money, we've really leaned into, what Luke was saying around being smart about diversifying our portfolio, and, just looking at a range of projects. And we've brought on CNOT to help us do that. And we've been really, really happy with them. Because as many of you probably on the call, are aware or have experienced, especially with small and medium-sized businesses, you're lucky if you have one person that kind of can work on this. Usually, it's looking at carbon credits is a fraction of somebody's job, and you can't expect to become an expert in what is a somewhat complicated marketplace and just, field of work. And so I've really leaned on experts to help us navigate the market and what our portfolio should look like and things like that. And so we've been using CNOT, who, as Luke had mentioned, they look across all the rating agencies. They look across sustainable development goals. They provide an assurance on, if a project doesn't have the impact that it is saying it will have, they will come in and replace those project credits for ones that do have the impact that we want. And they will also, if we often get approached by project developers who would like us to invest in their projects, and as a one-person team, I don't have the time to really deep dive into what those projects entail and if they're going to have the impact that we want them to have. And so I'll kick that over to the team at CNOT, who have scientists on staff who will then deep dive into those projects and determine whether it is something that's worthwhile, including in our portfolio or not. And so, today we really, again, lean on our experts to guide us in this, in that partnership. And so I think, one of the main takeaways is don't feel like you have to do this all yourself. And I would say, progress over perfection. Get going, act now. The money needs to move to these projects right now. And I think we need to just jump in, knowing that mistakes will probably happen. We've undoubtedly invested in bad projects. We probably will. I think it's less likely now because, again, as Luke has said, the tools and the methodologies and the practices for vetting these projects and understanding what you're getting involved with has improved so much in the last several years that I think, it's easier to jump in this space and have confidence in what you're doing. And I do agree, reduction first, great. That said, especially for any of you product brands out there, 99% of our emissions is in our supply chain. It's our scope 3. And as a small and medium-sized business in particular, we have little, if no leverage in our supply chain. We do transition to more, climate-friendly materials, but even that can be cost prohibitive and a challenge to do. We do that as much as we can. But in terms of, reducing emissions in our supply chain as a small and medium-sized business, it's incredibly challenging. And so while yes, if you can do the reductions, do the reductions, but these credits are so incredibly powerful and important in terms of moving money where the money needs to go to address the climate crisis. And so I'm excited that carbon credits have been kind of picking up steam again, because I don't see them as a secondary or inferior tool. I see them as one of many important tools that we need to use to address the climate crisis. One last thing, and I'll pass it off to Ryan. Similarly, I think there are times when, for example, we could invest in direct value chain reductions, whether that's putting solar panels on our factories or trying to find a power purchase agreement over in Asia, even though that's been very challenging to do and for many reasons. But sometimes our dollar just doesn't go as far. The ROI of making a direct value chain reduction, investment, our ROI is not as great as our dollar could go in potentially a really high quality carbon credit project where there's the economies of scale and the expertise and the scalability. So, I think how and when you utilize these credits is really a case by case kind of situation. And partners can really help, in understanding that landscape. So with that said, I'm going to pass it on over to Ryan and have him talk about his journey.
Thanks, Annie. Nice to meet you all. My name's Ryan Jansen, and I am one of the managing partners at Teleon. We're a Seattle-based technical services organization that does work with a bunch of very large companies and some medium-sized and smaller companies. We do all types of technical services, BI analytics, security, compliance, governance, supplier services, digital marketing, kind of all the big services that a lot of the bigger consulting companies do. We just are a smaller organization. We're around 150 people. And back in 2019, one of our big clients made a pretty big commitment to sustainability. They wanted to hit 50% carbon reductions by 2030. And they were heavily hinting that their suppliers should hit those numbers as well. And so we kind of took it upon ourselves. It seemed like an interesting challenge. I actually put together a little team, me and a couple of folks, where we just kind of saw this as an interesting opportunity to sort of look at our numbers. We didn't know anything about what these different scope things meant or categories or any of those topics. So, being a consulting company and and we do a bunch of governance in all different areas. We were like, let's take a look at this and see if there's something here. And so it became a really fun exercise. This was all pre-COVID. And so there was no talk of, I mean, we did some remote work just for convenience of employees. And we've always been a company that really prides ourselves on not spending money unnecessarily. So business travel was always at a minimum, and even our office space and stuff like that. We didn't do a lot of, I would say, lavish things with our finances. So when we looked at this from a sustainability perspective, we're like, yeah, this kind of aligns. So we started tracking everything. Annie said progress, not perfection. That was our approach as well. It just didn't, seem like there was a lot of really strict rules and compliance guidance at the time either. So we're like, let's just throw together a SharePoint site, track this stuff on Excel, and start seeing what we can do. And we'll assume we will get better and better every year. So we tracked everything for the first few years, then COVID hit. And honestly, that really helped in terms of our numbers, just because everybody went remote, business travel went to a screeching halt. And so 2019 being our baseline year was actually a good year from trying to get to a 50% reduction. But over the last few years, we got our numbers down about 74% from 2019 to 2024. I think we're down even a little bit more this year. But what kind of happened in the meantime was we were trying to sharpen our pencils in terms of accuracy. We always have prided ourselves in getting more detail with our clients. And so what we did was we started looking closer. In 2020, we were like, let's take a look at these numbers again and make sure that we've captured everything. In 2021, one of our clients is actually Amazon, and we started working with them in the climate pledge. So we started hiring people to help us that actually had sustainability background. My background is in the tech world, and I didn't have any of that. So having a few folks on our team that actually really have studied this stuff and care about this stuff really helped me sharpen my pencil as well. And so I added those people to the team. And actually, it was just me and two other people still, but I just kind of switched people up because now all of a sudden I had some people with some really good subject matter expertise. And through working with Amazon, we really got to know and see their dedication to this effort. In 2022, that client that was asking us to hit our 50% reduction began requiring us to do attestation and verify our data. So that added another level of, I would say, sharpening our pencils, because now all of a sudden we had a third party looking at our work. And they actually provided quite a bit of guidance as well, which was really helpful. They were like, hey, have you thought about maybe tracking this category? Because we noticed you had it. And we're like, oh, yeah, actually, that's probably something we should do as well. So, asking other groups to come and check your work isn't such a bad idea as well. So we did that. And then in 2023, we actually joined the Climate Pledge. And because we saw, that the 2040 net zero goal was something we thought we could achieve, just because we were already doing quite well with our 2030 numbers. And so then in 2025, well, actually, we did go to a smaller office space. So having this in the back of our minds all the time was a really good exercise too, because being one of the owners of the company, I was always, when we were spending money and things like that, I was always thinking about it. I didn't really like beat anybody over the head with it, but when I heard that we were thinking about getting a smaller office space, I was all in on that, just because A, a lot of our work had stayed remote, and B, I was like, hey, the added benefit is we can really reduce our carbon emissions that way as well. So if that's always in the back of your mind, I think it kind of gives that sort of cherry on top on a lot of things. In fact, one of the other things too we had been doing up until this point was, one of our big expenses is like just laptop and equipment for our consultants. And I had always been buying refurbished laptops because they had been a lot cheaper, but also they were really good quality and they seemed to work just as good as the brand new ones. But those were examples of where I really continued doing that, because we didn't have to report those emissions on on that equipment as well. So there's kind of this I constantly saw this sort of synergy between saving money and also reducing carbon, which was really cool. So getting to 2025, we were already looking at a 74% emission, and we had signed up for the Climate Pledge. We're doing all this work with Amazon. We really saw their dedication to carbon credits. And then I heard from my engagement manager who was working on the Climate Pledge that the rumor was that Amazon was starting to sell carbon credits. And we had been looking at credits online, but it just looked like a complete jungle out there in terms of who was selling what. And I'd heard through various media that some credits are better than others, and so I was just like, I don't even know where to start with this. Let's just wait a few years and eventually get to this and see if the market stabilizes. But when I heard that Amazon was actually doing some work here, I thought this would just be a perfect option to look at what credits they had. So over last summer, we worked with Michelle's team and talked to them about the credits that they were looking at selling. And it just became a no-brainer for us to buy credits from them. They were doing tons of due diligence. We had a lot of conversations with the approaches that they were taking. And because we had reduced our carbon so much already, it just became a no-brainer. It's like, why don't we just, we had done all the science-based reduction. Why don't we, this last 25 or 26%, we're never going to get these ones to go away. I mean, we can get down a little bit, and we're always trying, but we just knew that as our company continues to grow, I think we're gonna still have these challenges. So we needed to have somebody in place that we could work with, and we're really impressed with Michelle's team and the credits that we bought. The marketplace was very easy to use, and so we pulled the trigger, I think December of 2025, and hit a net zero emissions number. And so we were very proud of that. And I think that's it. I would say, just in terms of lessons learned, it's just, looking at the poll, it looks like a lot of you guys are already doing this, but sometimes when I talk to new companies about this, it's just that progress, not perfection. The more you do, it takes years to start to feel, and even I still don't, feel like super comfortable about all the things that I'm doing. It's constantly changing. There's new offerings. We're looking at now these renewable energy credits, I think they're called, for our electrical scope 2. And that's a whole new space that I'm kind of looking into. But I'm sure over the next few years, there's going to be more and more of these things out there. And but it's just one of those things where try your best, get it down. Next year, track it again, and work with independent third parties. I think that was one of our biggest, I, I would say, accuracy level ups was when we had somebody else kind of working with us. And just making sure that you work with a company that is doing the effort or making the effort to get high quality credits, because the last thing you want to do is spend money on something that doesn't move the needle. Yep, that's it. Nice to meet you all, and I'll hand this off to Michelle.
Thanks, Ryan. Everyone, a pleasure to meet you today. My name is Michelle Jolly, and I lead the carbon credit service here at Amazon. I wanted to start by sharing about the site that the credit service sits on, which is called the Sustainability Exchange. If we can move to the next slide. And the Sustainability Exchange grew out of the 2 years that I spent as the chief of staff to our CSO, our chief sustainability officer. I watched her over and over share our approach verbally with companies that were in our value chain, suppliers, customers, climate pledge signatories, talking about our approach to transportation and human rights and water and carbon measurement and buildings. And we decided we should just publish all that. We should share previously proprietary information with the public. And so the Sustainability Exchange is a free public website where we've published Amazon's approach across a number of impact areas. And it's not just our work now. This started in 2024, but now it has dozens of other companies sharing their playbooks and case studies in this space. And so for companies of your size where you're wearing many hats every hour, this can be a resource to you to figure out some of the pieces of your sustainability journey. And the next slide, we then thought about extending it to what are some of the solutions that are less accessible to companies that don't have a dozen scientists thinking about trees or a whole fuel team looking at fuel standards and feedstocks and a whole bunch of words that I didn't understand until the last year or two. And so we wanted to open up our portfolio of our carbon neutralization credits, commonly referred to as offsets, and our insets, which with our fuel decarbonization journey, to companies in our value chain, because the space is highly technical. It has that matrix of methodologies, standards, labels, and all of that, which we know can be intimidating for someone whose, sustainability is just one of the many roles that you play on a daily basis. Next slide, please. And why we decided to do this was not only to help, but there's a reason that it helps us too. By aggregating demand, we're able to drive the quality and the scale of the voluntary carbon market to where it needs to be for not only ourselves, but our whole value chain. Because as many of you know who are doing this work, it doesn't matter if we're the only people at the finish line. Everyone needs to get there and everyone needs to jump in. The scale of the small and medium business community, if everyone did a little something, would truly transform the planet. You could see it from space. That's one of my favorite things to say about this work is you could see the impact, especially in nature-based removals from space. And so that's why we were really excited to play this role and to open our portfolio and to let everyone leverage the due diligence that we're doing in this space. Next slide. And as has been impressed earlier, this work is complementary to all the work you're doing to pay attention to the way that you operate your business, and is really exciting, as Annie said, knowing that you can play a part in these solutions that are critical, that are the emergency brakes for the climate, especially when it comes to things like super pollutants, halting deforestation, and these things that if we don't get those solutions to scale, nothing else we do matters, and it's all the doomsday things will come to fruition. And so it's exciting to give access to companies in a really turnkey way. As Ryan said, that was part of what and when we talked to our most senior leaders about starting this work and opening up our portfolio, is we know a thing or two about marketplaces. And so we leverage all of the marketplace tech in addition to the science rigor to make these available, to make it as simple as possible. It truly is like shopping on Amazon. You go in and you say, I want this many by this date. And we do all of the working with the registries, and we give you the piece of paper that says these credits this methodology, this issuance were retired in your name. And it's been exciting to watch how that can allow business owners like yourselves to focus on the things you know best, the nature of your businesses that no one else can do, so that you don't have to lose sleep on this piece. Next slide. And so there's a bunch of resources, as I mentioned, that are available to you. So for those of you who are newer to this space, we've published a lot of what we call approach documents, our approach to neutralization, our approach to inset credits. If you want to learn about a newer space, we've got a whole bunch of resources on that. And then we also decided that we wanted to really appreciate the climate pledge community, as Ryan said, companies who've committed to net zero before 2040. And so for any of you on the call who are a member of that community, those companies receive even lower rates on these credits. We are not operating this as a profit-seeking venture. We're just covering our costs, but we are making them as thin as possible for our climate pledge signatories so that they can be accessible to companies who are who are willing to jump in and participate in these solutions. And that's it for me. Keeping it brief because Q&A is usually the most rich part of these discussions, and so happy to learn more about how we can help.
Thanks so much, Michelle, and everyone as well, Ryan, Annie, for these fantastic insights. So we do have a little bit of time for questions. We already have one question from Gary, really, which I'm going to read out loud because I think several of you could potentially help answer this. So Gary is asking, can we select projects within our own jurisdiction to promote economic regeneration and growth in our areas of operations? This would be really valuable and also contribute to social and economic regeneration in our area. So who wants to take this? Michelle, do you want to give this a...
Yeah, I can. This is another one of I talk about the layers on the submarine sandwich of this work. And one of these is the community impact. And for us, the public policy impact of some of this work. When we're able to say, not only is there an environmental benefit of this particular project, but guess what? It's going to employ 11,000 people in South Africa by doing this restoration work with Spec Boom. And South Africa is one of our newest places that we're operating for Amazon. That matters. When we talk about our ability to be one of the first projects issued by a jurisdiction in helping their forest ministry go through their first round of credits being issued, those are really impactful stories to tell. And so for a small, medium business and looking at the community in which you operate, that is a great option to look at. Think not only about where you operate your actual business, but your supply chain. So think, who's upstream of you, depending on the nature of your business. You may have suppliers in certain regions of the world, but I wouldn't get too fancy with wanting it in the state of the country in Asia, because that can sometimes be challenging and likely potentially making trade-offs on quality and impact, as Annie was saying. And so think about that, hold those things in both hands when you're trying to get as adjacent to your value chain as possible, because likely there's a tension there for you to decide about the adjacency versus the scientific impact of it. But you can get close with a lot of projects.
Brilliant. Thanks, Michelle. Luke, anything you'd like to add on this one?
No, I think Michelle touched on all the points. I mean, I think maybe just one thing to add is, as we're seeing the carbon market expand and grow, and we're seeing more interest in things like super pollutants, we're seeing companies double down on nature-based removals. There are projects all over the world. And so there's probably something, depending on how we define jurisdiction, that really resonates with your brand and with your customers. And that you can tie that storytelling into your operations and yourself as a company. But exactly as Michelle said, don't let the trade-off be against quality. If there's a sketchy project that has a really good story, it's probably not worth it to make that trade-off. So rigor around the quality and the integrity of a project still should be first and foremost. But there should be projects adjacent or in the jurisdiction where you operate that can meet that high quality bar, and that can be a story that resonates for you and for your community.
Brilliant. Thank you, Luke. I think we have another question from Kyle, as a matter of fact. So, can't SMEs do long-term offtake of credits on the sustainability exchange? What are the benefits of offtake versus annual spot purchases? Thank you. So I guess that's one for Michelle.
Yeah, I can explain spot and long-term offtake. So spot is like kind of the equivalent of shopping on Amazon. I need 10 credits this quarter. I'm going to go purchase those. Long-term offtakes is where you've got a pretty good idea of what you're going to need for the next few years. Maybe you're a 2030 commitment. Maybe your emissions aren't that volatile in terms of jumping around year to year. And typically, those long-term offtakes are require huge investment and aren't accessible for SMEs. We at our scale at Amazon are doing them, and part of the exchange is allowing companies to participate in a long-term offtake. So you could say, I need 100 credits a year from 27 to 2030 and leverage our pricing and our terms and our ability to secure that for you. The way to think about that is sometimes it can be a set it and forget it. The way you can move on to everything else and not need to think about it for the next 3 years. But there's also a price volatility piece here. As Luke was saying, we are going through a very interesting time right now in the voluntary carbon market. Standards are rising, quality is rising. That probably means for some segments, prices are going to rise because there's not a ton of supply for some of the highest rigorous segments. And so that is a tension you can look at in terms of, do you want to wait and see and purchase spot every year? Or do you want to make sure that you're locking in against some of this movement that's happening in it? I don't know, Luke, if you want to share anything else about what you think, how to think about those considerations for an SME.
Yeah, I think you touched on kind of the trade-offs here. I would say as an SME, though, really focus on spot purchases. Again, there's a lot of really high integrity credits. Companies like Amazon are making them available to you at spot purchase. Looking at forward offtake agreements, there's a lot of advantages to it, but it does complicate things substantially. And so if you're just starting to get into the market, definitely start with spot purchases, start to understand the market more, maybe as your company grows in size and you can manage things a little more sophisticatedly, then you can start to look into forward offtake agreements. But for now, go see what's on the market, what's available today, and just get started, I think would be my big recommendation.
Thank you both. Let's move on to the next question. We still have a few minutes. So Nick has a specific question, really. He's telling us about what he does with his business. So I develop soil carbon removals from regenerative agriculture. I work with buyers of all sizes. While the co-benefits of our work are spectacular, especially compared to engineered removals, there seems to still be emphasis on engineered removals in the market. So nature-based solution removals can be highly durable as well. Soil carbon 1 meter down in the Great Plains has been there for 10,000 plus years. How can new buyers navigate the value of nature-based solutions vis-a-vis emphasis on engineered removals? So that's an interesting one. Annie and Ryan might also want to jump in as SMEs who've had to navigate this themselves.
I mean, I'm no expert in this, so I feel like I should pass it off to somebody who knows more than this. I think for me, this again is where I haven't. I think that the emphasis on the engineered removals. I haven't seen the emphasis as much maybe as it is actually occurring out there. I think maybe because it is a more concrete, easier thing to measure. That said, again, that's where I think the portfolio approach works really well for a business like ours. Is that we're purchasing some, soil and grasslands rotation credits right now that some of the rating agencies rate it really high, some of them don't rate it very hard because it's hard to measure, but it's still an interesting concept that we want to invest in and we want to explore and support. So the way we're approaching it really is, again, just a diversified portfolio where we do a little bit of everything. So I don't know if that actually answers your question, but that's how we've been approaching these kinds of things.
I think that's very helpful. Anyone else? Anything to add to this?
I talk to our customers around if it's going to change your internal conversation with your leadership, think about the culture of your company and your employees and the stories you want to tell. We're a very engineering efficiency-based company. We're technology and operations. And so those engineered projects do speak to some of them. Being able to be a part of driving direct air capture to scale really resonates with our leadership. I completely agree with Annie on the balanced approach, but for those of you who are thinking about jumping in, see which lane allows you to get there faster. right? Like if the human benefits of the nature-based solutions and the health benefits get them there, start there. If the engineering piece gets them there, or the super pollutants and the public health benefits get them there, start there. We're at the point now where we need everyone doing something. And so think about it almost from like a cultural comms perspective. And as Luke said, get in, and then you can always switch over time what your portfolio is.
I think that's such a great point, Michelle. And that's actually the cultural comms aspect of it. One reason we have been interested in this ranch project and the soil health and working with ranchers is specifically because we're really interested in projects that bring groups that don't necessarily work together. And this is bringing a group of environmentalists together with ranchers, in Wyoming, Montana, coming together and working on something that supports the environment. And we felt that was a really valuable investment because we want to show that they're not mutually exclusive. Like we can all work together and make it work for everybody. And so we thought there was a real benefit to this project, even if it's not having the exact carbon outcome that we're guessing it's going to have. So it's something we're exploring and interested in. So I think, yeah, looking at the various value adds of these projects is important.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you both. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. I've been keeping my eye on the clock, but thank you so much again, Michelle, Ryan, Annie, Luke, for all these insights. I think it's fair to say that one of the main themes that really emerged today is the importance of finding trustworthy partners who can provide, obviously, high quality carbon credits, but also the need to act now and be very practical in your approach. And of course, the sheer vastness of information that's available out there makes, the conversation that we've had today even more valuable, especially for SMEs that have limited time and resources for pursuing climate action, as we've been saying all along. So I also hope that today was a reminder of how the SME Climate Hub, but also other organizations out there are here to support your efforts to decarbonize your business and help you remain competitive and future fit in the low carbon economy of tomorrow. If you have any questions following today's session, please feel free to reach out. There should be, I'm checking, yes, there's an email on this closing slide, so feel free to reach out. And please also look out for a number of follow-up materials that we'll be sending out, including a recap on the SME Climate Hub's blog, a recording of the webinar as well. That's going to be available on our YouTube channel, and also a number of additional resources on carbon credits that we will share with you via email in the coming days. And otherwise, on behalf of the entire SME Climate Hub team, thank you all again for attending today, and hopefully see you very soon.